This is my video on vocal pitch. How you, like, the typical frequencies that you use to speak. So I titled this essentially a question that I had on my mind as a young singer because I was a very high voice soprano. I still am a very high voice soprano. And I speak at a pretty low pitch. So I often have people assume I'm something like a mezzo-soprano, and I'm definitely not a mezzo-soprano. I was never one of those, I'm even on the fence about it kind of sopranos. It was very clear I was a high voice soprano from a very young age. So, yeah, and I would get that sort of advice, well, if you're a high voice soprano, maybe you shouldn't talk so low, you know? You should probably talk more like up here if you're a high voice soprano, because you might lose your high notes if you end up talking too low for too long. You're probably hurting your voice by talking so low. And, you know, I kind of took it with a grain of salt because I talked the way I talked, like I just, you know, and just kept doing it. And it feels weird for me to talk higher, you know? It doesn't feel like I'm being me. If I try to talk up here all the time, I just feel like I'm being someone else. It's not me, you know? So I don't really like doing it. So I don't. And actually, if you really look at the frequency of my voice, I'm not actually all that low as far as average female voices go. I sound low, but that can be a little tricky thing about maybe my vocal tract happens to be a little longer or something, so it just resonates those lower pitches a little more, the lower frequencies, the lower harmonics, and makes me sound low. But, which, if that got a little confusing for a second, what I was just talking about, allow me to clarify. So if you think of like a violin and a cello, okay, both string instruments, cello is the lower instrument, it's larger, right, than the violin, but there are notes that they overlap in their range, right? Like a cello could conceivably hit a similar high note to what the violin is hitting, but the sound of that note is very different between the cello and the violin, right? So on a cello, if they're hitting the same note, it probably sounds like a lower note because of the larger instrument, and larger objects resonate at lower frequencies, so the lower harmonics of that string that's vibrating as they take the bow across the string, those lower harmonics that they're producing are being accentuated more so than the high, versus on the violin, where the higher harmonics are probably being accentuated more than the low. So the tone, the overall quality or sound of the note can be very different. Even if it's the same frequency, you might say the pitch is different. You might hear it as lower on the cello than on the violin. So similar thing for vocal tract length. If you have a really, like if you have a lot of airspace, essentially a long airspace above your vocal folds, your voice might sound a little lower. And that could be the case for my voice, because I'm actually not super low of a frequency while I talk. But I do get that, and I get singers asking me that, even as a voice teacher, you know, like, oh, you know, I'll have a high school student who'll say their choir director said, well, if you're a soprano, you know, maybe you should be speaking a little higher. So I thought I'd address it, because it's definitely something I have opinions on, being the person who's always gotten that advice to talk higher, and I never really took the advice. So anecdotally, I'm doing okay vocally. I didn't lose any high notes. I'm 37 now, so I haven't lost any high notes yet. I'm alright. I still have the high notes I had when I was 18. I don't always sing them all the time, because, you know, if you're going to sustain a high F, it's like, if you're not getting paid to do that, why? You know what I mean? So, it's like I'm not just going to hit a high F just to show off to myself. Now, if I was going back on the audition circuit, okay, maybe I'd figure it out and, like, get the contracts, get the money for doing a high F, right? But that's me. So I haven't lost those notes. I can still hit them. And so a lot of the evidence out there, anyway, in the voice science world, suggests that the speaking pitch isn't really the problem. The actual main danger is strain. So if you are talking on a strained voice most of the time, if it sounds a little like it's a little tough, and if you can, I don't know if you can see, but I've put a little more compression here, and these external muscles are starting to get a little more active, and it doesn't feel very good. If that's what you're doing all the time, excuse me, gotta swallow that out. That's going to be a bigger problem than the pitch you're speaking on. And so, if you want to speak at a higher pitch, so for example, in the voice therapy world, I feel like this has a fair amount of overlap with voice feminization and also masculinization for transgender clients. I've worked with the voice feminization clients, a few of them, and if you want to change your habitual speaking pitch to be higher, you want to do it without straining. So the danger becomes this person, and we'll take it back to the singing world, okay? So the danger becomes the student has been told to speak higher, so now they're going to go around and they're going to talk like this, and they actually have a bit of strain while they're doing it, but they're talking higher because their voice teacher said they should, and even though their voice still sounds pretty clear, it's actually pretty strained. That's going to be a bigger problem long run, okay? You might not have access to the high notes. If that strain becomes so habitual that it's just hanging out there all the time, it's going to probably sink into the singing voice too, and you might have a little trouble with your overall range, or even with your low notes possibly, because you don't have as flexible of an instrument, because the strain is just holding it there, It's not allowing it to be as flexible, as sort of, maneuverable, right? As it would otherwise be. So that's the bigger danger. And same thing with voice feminization. Pitch isn't all of it. Raising the vocal pitch doesn't solve all the problems, but if you raise your vocal pitch and you're talking with strain while you do it, it's not going to be comfortable, and it might fatigue your voice and might be a bit of a problem. So, for example, because I started working with feminization clients, with trans females, I decided I needed to figure out how to do a comparable pitch jump in my own voice without the strain, because I felt it was incredibly unfair to my clients if I couldn't demonstrate how to speak higher without strain, right? I mean, that just seems kind of mean to be like, yeah, you need to raise your pitch by about, let's say a perfect fifth or something, right? Like for musicians out there, you need to raise it X number of hertz, right? And if I couldn't do that without strain, then that's, yeah, you need to practice what you preach, That's what I think. So to have a comparable jump, I'm not sure how much I'm jumping here, but to try to go a bit to where I was with the vocal strain before. So I'm raising my vocal pitch now, and I'm keeping this pretty well relaxed there. So I still have a sense that there's that mask resonance stuff, right? The buzz, the vibrations. I actually feel it right here. Perhaps I'm a little stuffy today because it actually is giving me a little bit of a headache right up here. But yeah, so I can talk up here for a long time if I want to. I don't feel like there's any strain in my voice. I could maintain this for a long time. It feels fine. I could do it at a softer volume too if I needed to. I could drop my volume a bit and still keep the strain out of the voice while I'm talking on the higher pitch. So let me get back down to my typical habitual speaking pitch. So that's an example of doing it without the strain. So for one more go round, okay, this is my normal default. This is me speaking a little higher without the strain, a little loudly though, so if I want to soften it, this is me speaking higher without the strain with a softer voice. And back down to habitual again, so that you can hear it. I'm going to do that with strain now, okay? So when I go up and I purposely, if I want to purposely raise my voice, I actually probably raised it a little higher than I meant to when I added in that strain, but now I have a bit of strain in my voice, and this would really wear me out after a while. If I spoke like this for probably longer than 5 minutes, I would be pretty worn out by all this vocal strain that I currently have. Whew. So, relaxing it back out again. This is stuff I've actually practiced on my own in an effort to be a better voice therapist. Being able to demonstrate vocal strain and being able to change around my vocal range, I feel, makes me a better therapist because I can demonstrate to my clients what I'm hoping to get them to, or, perhaps direct them off of strain. But I think it's important for singers to understand that even a singer can have a lot of strain in their speaking voice, and the speaking voice can actually be more fatiguing than the singing. I certainly had that for a while, where when I sang, my voice started feeling a little better because I had a lot of muscle tension in my speaking voice. Not that my singing voice was completely tension-free, by no means was it, but I probably had less tension when I sang compared to when I talked. So I had more fatigue from talking for a while there, until I went through therapy, and then it flipped. I had hardly any strain in my voice when I was talking, and then I'd have the strain when I was singing. It made that strain really evident. So even the little bit of strain I've become a bit sensitive to, because I've lived with pretty, I would say maybe moderate vocal strain for long enough, that even mild is, I can really tell when I have it. So that's my little spiel on vocal pitch. So vocal pitch, where you're talking, if you're talking too low or you're talking too high, the pitch is not the enemy. The enemy is vocal strain. So if you're straining to change the pitch of your voice while speaking or while singing, for example, if you're a theater actor and you are wanting to change the pitch of your voice for a character, if you do that with a lot of strain, night after night, that's going to probably fatigue your voice. It's going to be harder to sustain through the run of a show than if you learn to do that without the strain. So hopefully, if you get vocal coaching, if you are a transgender client who goes to a voice therapist to help with vocal pitch changes, if you are a singer who feels they need to do something about a certain access to certain pitches in their range, and you go to your voice teacher for that, hopefully you just keep it in your mind that strain is the enemy. So you just don't want to have excess effort in the throat when you're changing your pitch. It should feel like something you can do for a long time. It should feel like something you can sustain for at least an hour at minimum without any effort to do so. Okay? So go forth and, reduce your vocal strain as much as you can. All right. I'll see you guys next time. Bye.